Welcome to the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative, State Elder Justice Coalitions, Informing Services and Influencing Public Policy webinar. We're going to go over a few housekeeping items before we introduce our presenters from the National Network of State Elder Justice Coalition Steering Committee. Due to the high number of participants, computer audio will only be the option to listen to the presentation, so please make sure your computer speakers are on. This webinar will be recorded and available on the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative website after this training. Closed captioning is provided in the pod below the presentation. If you're having issues viewing closed captioning and do not have an Adobe Connect application installed on your computer, please close out of this meeting, download the Adobe Connect application, and then rejoin the webinar. If you do not wish to download the app, close out of the webinar, make sure Adobe Flash is enabled on the web browser that you're using, and then rejoin the meeting. You can then click on the link and join with the classic view, and then you can see the screenshot there below. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please contact me, Liza Cook, at Ramos Cook, R-A-M-O-S, Cook, _ Liza, L-I-Z-A, at BAH.com, or even easier, you can communicate with me in the chat pod. Now I'm going to turn this over to Shelley Jackson, consultant to the Elder Justice Initiative. Next slide. To our webinar today. My name is Shelley Jackson. I'm a consultant with the Elder Justice Initiative, and our mission is to coordinate the department's elder justice activities. Next slide. We also manage the department's elder justice website. So I invite you to visit elderjustice.elderjustice.gov, where you'll find resources and information for professionals. Next slide. And now I'd like to introduce to you the newly launched Network Locator Map. This map shows where elder justice networks of various types, from multidisciplinary teams to coalitions like the ones that we're going to hear about today, are located on this map. The idea is to encourage elder justice professionals to start or join some type of a network, including coalitions, because we believe in people working together. If you'd like to join or be...
Okay, great. The co-presenters today are Georgia Annisberger, myself, Risa Breckman, Paul Kakamis, Iris Freeman, and Lisa Narenberg. All of us have been involved with elder justice work for decades, including being involved with our home state elder justice coalitions, which includes California, Ohio, Minnesota, and New York State. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will provide information about the development and structure of state elder justice coalitions, shed some light on how they sustain, provide information on their priorities, as well as highlight some notable accomplishments, and share ways they use advocacy to strengthen state policies impacting elder justice. We will then discuss the role of the National Network for State Elder Justice Coalitions in supporting state coalition efforts, and we will end with questions and discussion. Next slide, please. Before we begin, it is important to define what we mean for the purpose of this webinar by State Elder Justice Coalition. This is the definition for today's purposes. A state or tribal elder justice or elder abuse coalition is an ongoing multidisciplinary state or tribal level collaborative with defined membership that is dedicated to identifying and addressing gaps or inadequacies in policy and practice related to elder abuse detection, prevention, and intervention. Besides coalitions, they may be called networks, councils, commissions, associations, partnerships, and task forces. And now I'm going to pass a virtual baton to Georgia Annisberger, my esteemed colleague, who will talk about coalition origins and organizational models.
Thank you so much, Risa, and good afternoon, everyone. In talking about origins and organizational models for state coalitions, I'm going to consider 5 separate subject areas. beginnings, auspice, mission, membership, and structure. And throughout this, I'm going to use a variety of state coalitions to illustrate key points, but just like the other presenters who are going to follow, I'm going to highlight those in my home state, which happens to be Ohio, where we have, and I think we're the only state that has this, 2 state elder justice coalitions. So we're going to begin with beginnings. And the first point I want to make here is that most state coalitions were formed after the year 2000. In fact, only a couple coalitions began before then and remain active today. The oldest continuously operating one is the Ohio Coalition for Adult Protective Services, or OCAPS as it's called, and it was founded in 1984. And we believe that the second oldest one is the Colorado Coalition for Elder Rights and Abuse Protection, and it came into being in 1993. By contrast, the majority of the remaining state coalitions originated in the last decade. The second point with regard to beginnings is that the impetus for state coalitions tended to be one of 2 different things, either a perceived need that required collaboration to address it, or else a kind of trigger event. Going back to OCAPS, the reason OCAPS was founded was to secure state funding for adult protective services. Ohio enacted its Adult Protective Services Law in 1980, and 4 years later there was still no appropriations from the state for the implementation of that law. So 3 of us, representing different parts of Ohio, got together and decided that only a statewide advocacy effort would change all that, and OCAPS became the vehicle for such change. Alternatively, some other state coalitions came into being in the aftermath of an event, and probably no event was more important in that regard than the 2002 National Policy Summit on Elder Abuse, which really served as a kind of springboard for what would become several other coalitions, most importantly, from my perspective, of course, coming from Ohio, the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission, but also another example of that would be the New York Coalition on Elder Abuse. Next slide. Turning now to auspice. The majority of state coalitions are part of other organizations. For example, the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission is under the auspice of the State Attorney General's office, and the Michigan Elder Justice Coordinating Council is part of the Elder Law of Michigan Incorporated. However, some state coalitions are independent, not-for-profit organizations, and this is true for OCAPS, and it's also true for the Tennessee Vulnerable Adult Coalition. Just a very few state coalitions are codified in law, but by way of illustration, the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission became permanent with the passage of state legislation that went into effect in 2018. That particular legislation not only delineated its existence, its name, but also identified its composition and its duties. Next slide. Looking at the mission or the purpose of state coalitions, they tend to be very wide-ranging with respect to their scope. In most cases, state coalitions sort of think of themselves as doing whatever it's going to take to address elder abuse and to promote elder justice. And that can be everything from public awareness activities to advocating for supportive public policy. This very broad scope of purpose can be seen in the mission statement of the Minnesota Elder Justice Center, and I'm going to show that mission statement in just a minute. And by contrast, the mission statement of the District of Columbia Collaborative Training and Response for Older Victims Coalition has a much more narrow focus, looking at traditional domestic violence type interventions. One more point before we go to those mission statements, and that is that many state coalitions not only address the mistreatment of older adults They also address the mistreatment of at-risk younger adults as well. Among Ohio's coalitions, for example, OCAPS includes vulnerable younger adults in its mission, but the Elder Abuse Commission does not. Next slide. Thanks. This particular slide indicates the two mission statements that I mentioned a moment ago. And you can see that the Minnesota one is very broad-based, very all-encompassing, and the one from the District of Columbia is narrower, focused much more on domestic violence in later life. Next slide. Now I'm going to turn to membership. Usually state coalitions are very open in their membership to any interested person or organization. They have kind of an open arms approach and want to take in anybody and everybody that feel passionate about this particular cause and want to be very active in terms of affecting it. So this very open arms approach is illustrated by the Coalition of Elder Justice in Connecticut. It's also illustrated by the Maine Council for Elder Abuse Prevention. In contrast, some coalitions are much more, or somewhat much more, restrictive. And that's true, for example, OCAPS, which requires annual payment of dues. It's also true of the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission, which, since it's all codified in law with respect to membership, only has very specific categories of membership and only specific representatives within those categories. And the main categories are state agencies, statewide associations, interest groups, legislators, and national organizations. Next slide. And the final topic I want to address is around structure. State coalitions routinely have steering committees or governing bodies, and sometimes they have paid staff. For example, OCAPS has a governing board and part-time paid executive director. Similarly, California's Elder Justice Coalition has a steering committee and a paid director and coordinator. The work of state coalitions tends to be accomplished within established committees. By and large, these committees tend to reflect either major work areas or organizational functions. A few years ago, the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission, for example, decided to model its standing committees after the domains found in the Federal Elder Justice Roadmap, and as a result, it has 4 such committees, and they are direct service, education, policy, and research. And because its membership and duties are determined by law, the Commission does not need, and it really doesn't have, of course, committees concerned with organizational functions. This is in contrast to the North Carolina Partnership to Address Adult Abuse, which has 6 committees, 3 related to work areas, namely those around awareness, education, and advocacy, and 3 related to organizational matters, namely those around membership, bylaws, and communications. And now I'm going to turn the presentations over to Paul, and he's going to discuss state coalition funding and resources. Next slide.
Thank you, Georgia. Georgia touched on some of the ways that coalitions support themselves and find resources and funding to move forward. And as you heard her describe them, elder justice coalitions can vary considerably in their origin, in their auspices, and in their mission. They also vary widely in the way they are funded and supported. Some rely on funding from government sources, as you heard her say. Some have the benefit of foundation financial support, and while others have asked for membership fees or collect registration fees for conferences or training events. Many also rely on the donated time of members or others with a stake in elder justice. Almost all, if not all, enjoy organizational support in some fashion, such as office space, use of meeting space, and technology and administrative support. I'd like to describe a few examples that the National Network of State Elder Justice Coalitions is aware of to give you an idea of the scope of funding strategies and to emphasize that there's no one cookie cutter model for starting or supporting a coalition. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with the one I know best, the New York State Coalition on Elder Abuse, which is sponsored by my agency, Lifespan of Greater Rochester. Lifespan is a not-for-profit aging service provider in upstate New York, which was founded in 1971 and now offers 30 different programs for older adults and caregivers. Lifespan sponsors the Upstate Elder Abuse Center, which among its intervention, educational, and advocacy activities incorporates the statewide Coalition on Elder Abuse. The idea of a New York State coalition was conceived prior to the New York State Elder Abuse Summit, the first summit, which was held in 2004. But the summit itself was one of those trigger events that Georgia referred to, excuse me, that gave rise to the actual formation of the coalition. We're very fortunate in New York because the State Office for the Aging and the New York State Legislature are both very supportive of the mission of a statewide elder justice coalition. We have had uninterrupted financial support in the form of state funding channeled through the Office for the Aging since 2004. The funding allows us to hire a full-time coordinator who is an attorney and an employee of Lifespan. She oversees the operation of the coalition, which now numbers over 1,900 members. Lifespan also supplies office space, administrative support, equipment, communication and networking platforms, and robust advocacy for continued funding from the Office for the Aging and the Legislature. And you can read more about the New York State Coalition on Elder Abuse in the article in Generations magazine that was distributed in the email that was sent to you to register for the webinar. Next slide, please. Not to be outdone, as Georgia pointed out, Ohio has two coalitions, the Ohio Coalition for Adult Protective Services, OCAPS, and as Georgia said, the oldest coalition in the nation dating back to 1984, and the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission. OCAPS also enjoys government funding, but in this case, it's VOCA, Victim of Crimes Act funding through the federal government. Annual membership dues and conference sponsorships also offer funding for the coalition, and volunteer members also contribute their time to the work of the coalition. OCAPS has a board of directors who are again volunteers, and those who are paid, the coalition staff, so to speak, are actually self-employed contractors who are home-based. The Ohio Elder Abuse Commission, on the other hand, was formed more recently. In this case, the organization was originally an all-volunteer group, but as a result of advocacy, the commission was codified into Ohio law and fell under the auspices of the Ohio Attorney General's office. Membership is specified by law, and the Ohio Attorney General appoints members from the organizations and disciplines specified in the statute. Next slide. The predecessors of the Minnesota Elder Justice Coalition were two smaller stakeholder coalitions. The predecessor coalitions were predominantly volunteer organizations with partial funding from small foundation grants. Then in 2014, the leaders consolidated their groups and incorporated the resulting larger organization as a not-for-profit. The current budget encompasses multiple funding streams, the Minnesota Crime Victim Services resource, federal OVC funding, local foundations and corporations also contribute, and individual contributions and revenue from an annual World Elder Abuse Awareness Day conference are also contributors to the treasury for the Minnesota Coalition. The founders represented domestic violence and sexual assault in law enforcement fields, as well as health and human services, long-term care, and regulatory worlds. The backgrounds of the founders have influenced policy direction and opened access to funding sources from the systems they were and connections they were affiliated with. Next slide, please. The next slide is about the North Carolina Partnership to Address Adult Abuse, which is a grassroots effort to address abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable adults. This is an all-volunteer, self-funded organization with monetary support from member dues, contributions, and revenue from an annual conference. In addition, individuals, agencies, and businesses support the work of the partnership. And then last slide, please. Montana has an elder abuse coalition, which is an example of a purely voluntary member-driven state coalition. Voluntary participation includes the Montana government agencies, such as the AG's office, prosecutors, law enforcement, and also financial institutions. The coalition receives some support from the Montana Financial Education Coalition, which is a chartered nonprofit organization. However, this is an informal arrangement and there's no contractual agreement with the MFEC. The Montana partnership made a presentation at the National Network membership meeting last November as a featured coalition in focus, in which we feature a member coalition at every membership meeting. It was clear then that in contrast to the New York, Minnesota, or Ohio coalitions, they operate on few resources except for the passion and vision of the volunteer leaders and their members. They showed remarkable passion and energy for stimulating interest in advocacy and elder justice matters in Montana. All of these coalitions demonstrate that there are multiple ways to start and support elder justice coalitions, but the real engines that make them go forward are the 3 C's, as I think of them: collaboration, connections, and commitment. And I'll turn the podium over to Iris at this point.
I believe it is Lisa.
Oh, Lisa.
Thanks,
sorry,
Paul.
to Lisa, who will
Hi, everyone.
talk about the next section.
Hi, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Okay,
Yes.
Great. So in preparing for today, we put out a call to our coalitions, asking them for examples of what they were doing. And as I was going over the responses, I kept thinking, why aren't we doing that? Or what a great idea. We should be bringing in lawyers to help draft policy, or we should be sharing cases from individual agencies with legislators. And so it really reinforced for me that we were onto something. If I was still getting ideas, and I've been at this for a very long time, as have the other members of our team here, that really others could be benefiting from sharing ideas too. So I just wanted to pull out a little some of the activities. Most of the coalitions, as you've heard already, focus on advocacy, but I wanted to take a look at some of the other things that they're doing. So that includes providing support to local MDTs and coalitions. And I think, as a lot of you know, MDTs and coalitions are really the backbone of our elder abuse response systems. But starting teams is hard, and sustaining them over time is even harder. And so coalitions have really stepped up to help in that regard. Montana's coalition helped to set up FAST teams, financial abuse specialist teams, and they use computer software to track how the teams are doing, and then they report on to their governor about what the FAST teams are doing. In New York, as Paul mentioned, the New York coalition has been really active in securing funds for their enhanced multidisciplinary teams, and then they provide the teams with support and guidance. And in California, we worked with our state VOCA administrators, Victims of Crime Act administrators, to teach them about multidisciplinary teams, which then led them to start funding teams. So that was a way of bringing federal funding into our programs. And I know a lot of you are now using VOCA fundings for direct service and some for teams. So the next slide is mentoring and leadership development. And this is something that I find really exciting because I think it's really a way to diversify our field. It was Minnesota's coalition that I was referring to earlier when I talked about offering internships to law students. Minnesota's also provided internships for social work or for other students. And in North Carolina, they collaborate with a social work program within a state school to put on an annual conference, which I think is a terrific way of getting students involved and, as I said, diversifying the membership. We have an exciting project going on in California. We started working in the last couple of months with a college economics class that's studying mapping technologies. And so we provide them with data and then they map it. One of the things that we're interested in right now is looking at disparities in adult protective services across the state. And so we gave them the data and then they're mapping where APS cases are being reported. It's our way of trying to demonstrate disparities around the state. So next slide, please. In the area of research, New York's coalition helped identify the need for incidence data, which was really important in guiding their work. They then helped secure funding for the project and have disseminated the results. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen the products of that work. They've really done some terrific research that provides some great insights that a lot of us have benefited from. The Ohio Elder Abuse Commission has had a long-standing research committee, and one of the projects that I thought was really interesting that they've been involved with is surveying stakeholders about research priorities. We know that a lot of research ideas and research studies get conceived in ivory towers, and so it's really interesting, I think, to see when you have ground up approaches to identifying research needs. And Minnesota's coalition focuses a lot on its strategic plan that they use to guide their activities on an ongoing basis. The next slide, please. In the area of coordination and support, I think we can all agree that it's really important for state legislators to hear from their constituents and especially to hear their stories. And North Carolina's coalition has a really interesting project where they're gathering case scenarios and then getting them to legislative members. In California, our counties like to do their own thing, which is good, except that we felt that there was really a gap in leadership for adult protective services. And so we advocated for a state APS liaison who coordinates local adult protective service programs, works with other state agencies, and also liaisons at the national level. Next slide. In the odds and ends category, coalitions are holding conferences, trainings, summits, webinars, and a lot of groups are gearing up right now for World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, which is later this month. Ohio is one of the few programs that does some direct service work in operating a helpline called HOPES that helps callers access resources and report crimes. And I think a lot of coalitions are really breaking new ground in discovering what's needed. One of my favorite resources comes from Minnesota, and it's a manual that helps residential care workers spot and respond to financial exploitation. So you have a coalition that identifies a need, that puts out a terrific product that then can be used by groups around the country. Next slide. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention COVID-19. I think we're all trying our best to respond to the pandemic and also to the draconian cuts to services that are looming as a result of lost revenues to states as a result of the pandemic. OCAPS is using its helpline to track trends that they're seeing in the pandemic, what's happening around the state. And they also have been offering expertise in how to work with COVID in congregate living facilities. Maine has been developing videos and PowerPoints on COVID-19, and New York has been distributing COVID-19 resources on their website and through news bulletins and emails. And they've mostly been focusing on scams, the census, and relief payments to make sure that people that are eligible get those payments. They've also been focusing on innovations that have popped up, including a virtual coalition that was created in response to the shutdown. And they've been producing podcasts and started a website. In a few minutes, you're going to be hearing more about the National Network of State Elder Justice Coalitions, and at our next meeting, we'll be spending more time on talking about COVID-related responses. I also just wanted to mention that if your community has been doing things that you think are interesting and that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to do so. You can either do that through the chat or contact us individually. And I think I will now turn it over to Iris. So Iris, take it.
Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. This is a very short time to share a lot of information. And so just to begin the part on advocacy, I wanted to provide a scope of what this includes. It encompasses work to enact and amend laws as you'd expect, but also promulgate and amend rules, to create and amend policies, and to design response systems, and this is going on at every level of government. The objectives being to protect those at risk, to improve tools for redress, and to improve working relationships among responders. And I should say, parenthetically, that there is no law that will make people speak in the same acronyms, but we certainly can do things like amend data practices laws at the state level to encourage and enable entities to work together. Next, please. Again, starting with the Minnesota Elder Justice Center, which, as was pointed out, is the product of two earlier efforts. Public policy work fully preceded the establishment of the center and began largely with targeting financial exploitation, including redefining financial exploitation in the criminal code to help prosecutors, amending penalty levels, the statutes of limitation, the capacity prosecutors would have to aggregate or to choose venues that would be more suited to the case involved. Another aspect was advancing communication between investigators and financial institutions, and with the training to back it up. Next slide, please. More recently, we have been very much involved in additional protections for those in residential care settings. This is continuing work focused on assisted living, defining terms and redefining practice in adult protective services. Again, continuing work focusing on the definitions of caregiver and self-neglect in the reporting law. Helping to advance funding for adult protective services and the long-term care ombudsman, and working in the area of guardianship and conservatorship with new legislation passed just weeks ago to promote less restrictive options and a focus on the practice of supported decision-making. Next slide. All right, and these themes are those that you will see in our colleagues across the country in the area of financial exploitation, and these are just a few examples. Montana's Elder Fraud and Exploitation Protection Network work to provide safe harbors for financial institutions who report suspected elder fraud. California continues to push for measures to provide victim compensation to victims of financial crimes. The residential care focus, partners organized through Georgia's Forensic Special Initiatives Unit in the Georgia Department of Human Services has worked on penalties for care facilities' failure to report abuse and neglect, as well as a death of a resident as a result of maltreatment. Many of us are involved in amending state statutes and guiding better practice. Maine's Council for Elder Abuse Prevention promoted the governor's executive order for a state elder justice coordinating partnership whose appointees will adopt a roadmap for their systems. Next slide. And again, Ohio Elder Abuse Commission was codified in state law. They've led the work on adult protective services interdisciplinary teams and expanding mandated reporting. New York disseminates RFPs for elder abuse mini grants to build local capacity. Again, in the area of adult protective services, North Carolina's work to produce APS case scenarios from each county is not only a partnership, but it will enable them to illustrate the depth and breadth of elder maltreatment for state lawmakers. California sponsored a bill creating an APS-operated eviction prevention pilot project. What could be more timely than that? And in the area of surrogate decision-making, again, just one example, New York led the work to revise the state's power of attorney law. Next slide, please. And here I will turn the microphone to Risa Breckman, and just in closing to say that when any of us listens to the others, we get a very, very strange, an acute case of platform envy, because in fact the inspiration or the envy that we get from one another is a very, very true and very valuable. So Risa, to you.
Thanks, Iris. And now I have the great pleasure of talking with you about the National Network of State Elder Justice Coalitions. I will refer to it as the National Network during my presentation, and you'll see on the slides NNSEJC during my presentation, which of course stands for the name of our organization. Next slide, please. Well, this presentation will provide you with core information about the National Network. Additional information about the organization can be found in the recent American Society on Aging's publication, Generations. This edition, entitled Taking Action Against Elder Mistreatment, was edited by the John A. Hartford Foundation and the Education Development Center. Next slide, please. There are many important articles on elder mistreatment in this edition of the ASA Journal, which is offered generously as open access by ASA and the Hartford Foundation. The article, Building a National Elder Justice Movement State by State, is the one that provides additional information about the National Network and profiles the coalitions from California, Minnesota, New York, and Ohio. Next slide, please. As you heard, state elder justice coalitions are forming across the country to stop elder abuse and promote elder justice through public policy, advocacy, practice, professional training, and public awareness. The National Network's purpose is to advance these state-level efforts using 4 methods. We're helping statewide elder justice coalitions with multiple professional constituencies attain their common goals. 2, to collect and make available innovative models and strategic approaches to strengthen members' capacity and program efforts. 3, to generate networking opportunities for state elder justice coalitions. And 4, to assist new multidisciplinary state elder justice projects develop broad-based sustainable coalitions. And most importantly, we believe that it is through collective action that state and national elder justice can be achieved. Next slide, please. I want to talk briefly about our motivations for starting this organization. At the American Society on Aging's 2018 conference, Paul, Iris, Georgia, Lisa, and I presented together on the work of our own state's coalitions. In the process of planning for this presentation and conducting it, we found that we were all inspired by state-level elder justice pursuits. The more we talked with each other, we found we shared a deep curiosity about other states' efforts to build coalitions. We also found a third motivation in the fact that the National Network to End Domestic Violence, founded in 1990, has had great success in building an effective network of state domestic violence coalitions and groups. So we got to work, and in 2018, we started developing our purpose and developing a structure while also defining eligibility. We identified existing state coalitions by posting an announcement on the NCEA's listserv and by canvassing national organizations and experts. We discovered that no comprehensive list of state elder justice coalitions existed. Our current membership of 15 state coalitions represents most of the coalitions we know about, but also indicates there is still work to be done to develop state coalitions so all states have them. And then we conducted outreach by developing a web page on the California Elder Justice Coalition's website and developed a brochure. In April 2019, we launched at the American Society on Aging's conference exactly 1 year after our planning discussions began by presenting the national network at a peer group meeting there. The next month, we conducted a webinar through the California Elder Justice Coalition's webinar series, and in July 2019, we held our first quarterly membership meeting via conference call. Next slide, please. So the steering committee's outward-facing work includes convening and facilitating quarterly member meetings, and we're having our fourth one in June this month, participating on the Elder Justice Coalition's leadership group, conducting outreach activities such as the article in Generations I mentioned earlier, and also NASW has written about the national network, conducting webinars and workshops at conferences. And of course, there are many administrative responsibilities the steering committee does that any organization has to do to move the work forward, from the mundane to strategic planning and everything in between. Next slide, please. Our membership meetings use phone, video, and video conferencing and have at least 10 to 12 state coalitions on each call. These meetings are designed for coalitions to share information about their work and also bring to the coalitions important, timely information from the field. The agendas typically have 4 segments. The Coalition in Focus gives time to one coalition to share in some depth about their coalition structure and activities, successes, and challenges. There's always considerable discussion following those presentations about things like sustainability, staffing, structure, governance, and coalition activities. These conversations are a way for coalitions to innovate, grow stronger, and provide mutual support for the work. This is followed by the National Network providing updates on our work during the quarter, and we have started to bring guest speakers to present on pertinent elder justice issues. For example, in March, we had a public policy discussion with Bob Luncato, the National Coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition, and Meredith Whitmire, the Federal Policy and Media Coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition. And in June, Bill Benson, a consultant and national policy advisor to the National Adult Protective Services Association, will present an update on federal action to strengthen adult protective services. And then each coalition provides any updates they want to share about upcoming events or issues their states are confronting, which we call updates from coalitions coast to coast. And regarding eligibility for membership, a state or tribal elder justice coalition is eligible for membership, and the definition of coalition we are using for today's webinar that we shared at the beginning of the presentation is also the definition of coalition we use for membership in the national network. And again, besides coalitions, these groups may be called networks, councils, commissions, associations, partnerships, and task forces. Next slide, please. So in the future, we will continue the quarterly membership meetings. We'll aim to bring on new coalitions by continuing to do the outreach like today's webinar. We aim to elevate and amplify state coalitions' voices to influence policy and direction at a national level. And we aim to provide members connection with other major national elder justice groups and leaders through our membership meetings and providing other networking opportunities. Next slide. The lessons we have learned includes a deepening of our belief that state coalitions are highly beneficial because they move state elder justice efforts forward. If you're thinking of starting a state coalition or are working with one, we have learned a few secrets to success from listening to those working on them. First, perseverance, tenacity, and a shared passion go a long way. So determination, a stick-with-it approach, and finding partners with a shared passion for elder justice work and believing in the possibilities of collection action is very important. Second, leverage resources. For example, convene a peer interest meeting by tacking this onto an existing conference in your state or join others' efforts developing a statewide coalition. And third, don't be deterred if you're told there's no money. We have heard from numerous coalitions that a lot can be done with volunteer effort, and get others involved and build from there. Next slide, please. To join the national network, send the following information to NNSEJC@gmail.com. You want to send the name and address of the state coalition, the contact person, the coalition website if applicable, and the name of the designated representative with their contact information. Designated representatives will receive periodic communications, including updates on the national network and invitations to participate in the conference calls, the webinars, and other activities. Next slide, please. So, and here's the information on the presenters today. While we leave this up, we'll open this up to questions through the chat box. Thanks so much. And if you have any questions, just type them in. We have a couple of people typing, so hang on.
I, for one, this is Iris, am feeling such a sense of gratitude that we were able to complete our work with enough time for questions that I also figured there'd be a couple of people who are not known as wallflowers in this crowd. Lisa, do you want to start? Whoops. Can't hear you, Lisa.
So I think Lisa might be having trouble with audio. So I'm going to read the, I'll read the questions.
Lisa.
So have you been involved with any of the silver legislatures nationally? Anyone want to answer that?
I can simply say no for Minnesota because there hasn't been a silver legislature initiative there. And as long as I have the microphone, to Kimberly's question, Lisa is, if we can only get her voice back, the California representative who'd be able to tell you more about the efforts they've been making to address financial compensation for victims. And if it's not possible to reach her this afternoon, please feel free to email her at the email address on your screen now, because she would be the expert on this panel on that topic.
Can you hear me now? Am I back?
Yes.
Can you
Lisa,
hear me now? You can hear me. Oh, okay,
yes.
Great. I'm back.
I think
We're getting all kinds of signals saying
Yes.
that connections are bad, and so I'm very pleased to be back.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't spend a lot of time. We like to talk about our successes, and we probably should spend more time talking about our failures. And victim compensation for financial abuse is something that we've tried multiple times in California. We sponsored legislation. As many of you know, under Victim of Crime Act funding, there are different pots of money, and compensation is one that goes directly to crime victims or to their advocates to make them whole, to provide whatever services they need. And that has only historically applied to victims of physical violence or other kinds of crimes, and not to financial crime victims. And we know how important that is. People who are financially abused have all kinds of needs for mental health services and advocacy with creditors and landlords and all of those kinds of things. And so we've, a couple times, we've introduced legislation to try to permit our state to allocate those funds for victim compensation for victims of financial crimes. I think one of the drawbacks is that people are just, they recognize it's a need, but are afraid that it might be too much of a need, and that they would be turning on the faucet for more demand than they can accommodate.
This is Georgia Anitsberger, and I noticed that there was a question from Philip Marshall with regard to wings or a specific guardianship focus with regard to state coalitions. And I can say in terms of Ohio, we have through our Ohio Supreme Court a subcommittee on adult guardianship, which has been in existence probably at this point for 20 years and has been very active in all the ways that Philip Marshall was suggesting in terms of assessments and reforms, etc. And as members of that subcommittee on adult guardianship, it's a very broad-based group, but it includes representation from both of the state elder justice coalitions, both OCAPs as well as the Ohio Elder Abuse Commission. So those two are well represented and their viewpoints are taken in that regard.
If I may, this is Iris, and in Minnesota, there has been a considerable partnership with those who have for a long time been working together on these issues, and Minnesota did receive WINGS designation and has now, for the last several years, a Center for Excellence in Supportive Decision Making. And so it was certainly not the initiative of the Elder Justice Center to work on this year's legislation. It really was a joint effort between the Elder Justice Center and those who have been active in the WINGS movement and in looking at broader issues of substituted and supported decision-making. It's also one of the primary ways that we work in concert with advocates for younger people with disabilities or vulnerabilities. So it's very important for us.
I'd also like to just add to that, if people aren't aware of what WINGS stands for, it's Working Interdisciplinary Networks for Guardianship Stakeholders. Clearly, guardianship and the need for alternatives to guardianship is a need that comes up over and over again with coalitions. My coalition, CJC, did a webinar featuring Erica Wood, who I believe is on this call, talking about WINGS and that whole system, and that's archived on our website if you're interested. It was a really great webinar where we had people from WINGS projects and Erica talking about them. So that our web address is elderjusticecal.org. I guess I was going to be fielding questions. I got a little ahead of myself here. Do we have a few more minutes, or is it time to lob it back to our hosts?
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. We have a question. Massachusetts had one. I assume we're talking about a WINGS or a coalition, but lost funding 5 years ago along with office space at the State House. The group was created in the 1980s by then Governor. Attempts have been made to revive via website communication. Current president is Sally Hoyt. Thank you for passing that along to us. And I should mention that we're always looking for new groups that are interested in joining, and we will follow up with that and others. Okay, well, on behalf of the partners on the call, we really appreciate your being here today. Look forward to hearing all of your good ideas. We really are open, even if you're not a coalition, if you're doing work at the state level and think that you want to contribute ideas, we're always looking for great ideas and innovation. So thank you all so much for joining us. And do we have any wrap-up from our hosts?
This is Shelley Jackson, and I'd like to thank our presenters today. This was wonderful. I think it really showed us the range of ways that state elder justice coalitions can originate and function. And I want to thank our attendees for coming today. And I hope that you're able to take away something from this presentation that helps your own state, maybe Massachusetts, maybe some of the others. And again, we just really support this idea of elder justice coalitions and people working together to move the agenda forward. I think it's terrific, and thank you again to our presenters for taking the time to educate us today. And thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The host left the meeting.